Ronak and I really are similar, is that we really just thrive on those relationships with the kids and the time in the classroom. Like that, my day goes so fast because I'm the time with kids is just like that. I'm having a good time. That, and I would say, like, as far as me being an IPS, part of it is because I've been in IPS that entire time, even though I've been displaced multiple times. And it's honestly because one, having the stability of a school district, I have never had to reapply for a job. I've only had to find a new location through all of these changes. And so knowing that my salary would be stable, that my benefits would be stable, there's a huge value to that in the system piece. And honestly, I just had fallen in love with the kids of this district and serving the kids of IPS. And I just haven't wanted to leave that.
We're good? You all ready? You good? Ready? Good. All right, ready? All right.
What's good, y'all? Welcome back to Conversation Piece, your place to discover the untold stories of Indianapolis. About forgot what the intro was. My name is Patrick Armstrong. I am your host, and if you're listening to this on release day, it is now April. It is still 2025, though. It is still the year of community, and with that in mind, we have a really incredible show for you today. My guests are career educators, IPS advocates, and just a really great duo when it comes to communicating what has unfortunately become a really complex plethora of information about public education in Indianapolis. One is a middle school math teacher at H.L. Harshman Middle School and the Indiana State Teachers Association's Educator of the Year for 2024. The other is a middle school science teacher at T.C. Howe Middle School and a 2024-25 Teach Plus Senior Writing Fellow. Together, they have the kind of professional and lived experience that truly makes them the experts on the subject of public education. And we're going to tap into that expertise to try and educate ourselves right now. So without further ado, it is my great joy and privilege to welcome Tina Ahlgren and Ronak Shah to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Having us.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first question I'm going to pose to you right now, how are y'all doing? Like, for real, how are you doing?
Exhausted. This session has been really challenging in the legislature. And so it's been constant, advocacy, following up, reading up, trying to decide what are the best moves to make. In a normal year, we're looking at one or two pieces of legislation that we're really trying to battle, trying to figure out. But this year it has just been, constant plethora of bills and changes. And that's just here at the local level. It's not even counting the things that are going on nationally. So tired. I tried to take a vacation this week and I came back and zombie language had come back from the dead. So
same. And also just like trying to figure out like, I have had this analogy in my head of like, okay, if things are blowing up, if everything's blowing up, what can I do to like direct the debris to fall in the right places? Because like there's a lot of places on the planet where things have been blowing up a lot faster and a lot more frequently than here.
Sure.
I'm just not used to it. And I don't know a lot of people who have experience with it. So now it's like, okay, there are things changing rapidly. There's a lot of decision makers who are not necessarily talking to each other and planning together. And so I'm like trying to find where are the areas where like we who are on the ground can like make an impact and steer things so that when they land, they won't create catastrophes for everybody, because a lot of the decision makers don't have a lot of knowledge about what they're making decisions about and what they're impacting. And that's exhausting, but also it's like, we're not entirely helpless either.
Sure.
And that does give me a bit of energy and a bit of optimism. Because there's a lot of people that want to listen to teachers and they realize their ignorance. It's just the pace of decision-making happening at every level is so fast and everyone's trying to keep pace with everybody else and show off for everybody else that not everyone's taking the time to listen.
For sure. I appreciate you both sharing. We're recording this at the end of your spring break. You said you're trying to take a vacation. It's because they have built-in vacations at school. Yeah. And unfortunately right now, it's like you can't even get away because, like you said, things are moving so fast. Like even if you wanted to take a break, like if you look at the TV or your phone or any device that potentially could give you information, it's probably going to be on the front page. And so it's like the stuff that's impacting you directly. And it's like, oh my God, I just want to sleep. I just wanted to drink coffee in the morning in silence, no noise. And because of the pace that we're moving at, and I realize the sense of urgency is real. Another reason I want to have this conversation, again, because we're making information accessible, but I feel like we're slowing it down. I want to slow down and kind of build up to where we are. Again, go to Creative Mornings, check out their conversation, the presentation they did. It was fantastic. It's going to inform a lot that we talk about here, but it's the foundation for what we're about to get into. So I want to start at that point. I really appreciate you had Samson come out. Shout out to Samson.
Yeah.
Because he's an amazing storyteller, incredible historian, particularly for the Black community here. But I think it's also really important to establish like strong contextual foundations to build from. I think we currently operate a lot from opinion and not on fact. And so it's always shaky ground. It's always hard to move forward from something like that. I just finished a book called Original Sins: The Miseducation of Black and Native Children and the Construction of American Racism by E-Viewing, which is about the public education system, particularly in how it impacts Black and Native kids throughout the history of this country. At the beginning of the book, she asked a really simple question, but I thought it was really interesting, and I wanted to ask because I feel like it's simple, but it can be complex, and I want to hear from two educators with lots of experience and see what your perspectives are. So, from your respective perspectives, what is the purpose of schools?
That's a great question. And there is the purpose that I want it to be, and then there's the real purpose. The truth is that public education has, for most of its history, not been about what I think it should be.
Sure.
So I'll start with what I want, and then I get to where it is. I would love for schools to be a common forum for everyone who comes into the world to be able to get to know people of every part of their community. So an exposure to different types of people from different areas of the country, people from different backgrounds, from different races, religions, everything like that. And in that forum, you get exposed to difference, you get exposed to knowledge, you get exposed to history, you get exposed to experimentation, and you get exposed to risk and the rewards that come with overcoming risk. Obviously, then you can talk about what that looks like, and you can talk about learning reading and learning math, learning science, but those are all just methods towards the same end.
Sure.
And at the end of your education, I would hope at the end of going to school, you become the kind of person that I would want to live next to, the kind of person that I would want to be in a friendship with, the
Sure.
kind of person I would trust to vote. In reality, though, I think for most of our time, it's been about pursuing the goals of the state. So if the state interest is elevating one group of people and subjugating another, the schools have been set up to do that. And I think there's no way to look at history without seeing that as true. And even in Indianapolis public schools, which I am a defender of, we have that same history. We
Sure.
also were segregated, and we kept trying to maintain the segregation even afterwards. And we can get to that a little bit later. But that history is laid bare in our Creative Mornings piece, which, by the way, let me just say, that was all her. Tina did all the work on that. I just kind of hung out. And also shout out to Ryan Hundley for bringing everyone together.
You
Bringing
played an
Samson
important
to the
role
table.
in the presentation.
I was the little stooge there. But I'll stop there and kick it to there it is, student. I'll stop there and kick it to Tina.
No, you said all of the things that I would say. The only thing I might add is, those interests of the state. There definitely seems to be an increasing focus on what it means to be a good worker, right? And and I think I would also disagree with a lot of people in the state of what it means to be
Sure.
a good worker. But that is definitely a focus that we see a lot with the changes in the graduation requirements.
Sure.
There's even been an emphasis on allowing 16 and 17-year-olds to work unrestricted hours, to get work experience. So, again, those interests of the state often are money-based and not necessarily well-rounded children-based.
And I think we have to keep that in mind when we're looking at why certain policies are coming into place. Why would Tennessee want to restrict access to public education for undocumented students or for immigrant students?
Sure.
Of course we have this. And what is that? What relationship does that have to training younger and younger children to be prepared for a labor force?
Right.
There's a connection there. And I think because we know that that's happened historically, we have to assume that it's happening on some level now.
Sure. It makes me think of the school to prison pipeline. It makes me think of Eve calls it a nexus, not a pipeline per se, but it makes me think of like this school to factory pipeline where. So I'm not an educator. I'm married to an educator, so I have the privilege of like seeing through her eyes, but I don't have that firsthand experience from just like contextually, like my perspective. It's felt like education has become less about critical thinking and learning and more about memorization because we're trying to push people into jobs that maintain the state, I guess I would say.
Can I react to that too?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think there's the job piece of it, but I also think that for most of our history, the teaching critical thinking and learning has been restricted to a very small group.
Sure.
Even you go back to like Aristotle and like all that types, like it's like, okay, like you're going to be the emperor, you can learn critical thinking. Everyone else is not really learning that. And I think we've had like spurts of history where we've had like energy around education where like we should like teach everyone to think this way. And then a war happens or a genocide happens or economic collapse happens or something happens and we pull all of that back.
Yeah.
And I think recently most people will point to No Child Left Behind and standardized testing as the reason that we're focused on memorization. But truthfully, I think there's been a pendulum going back and forth for as long as we can trace.
Well, it's just an extension of previous policy or mindset around how we want to educate kids or specific kids to achieve certain positions. Which brings me, okay, so I think that's a good segue to thinking about, like, this is the foundation, which is certain kids are being taught a certain way. Sometimes we want everybody to be taught the same way, but in reality, we are always kind of defaulting. A lot of times we default back to a specific mindset. To that end, I think there's always been, like, a private school element to the public school education. There's always been like, okay, if you don't want to, or if you have the ability and you want to have an education on your own or whatever, you can do that. You just got to pay for it. And so I think that kind of dynamic has maybe always existed a little bit. And then in the 70s, charters became a part of it. So kind of another division of what a school is, which didn't actually happen in Indiana until 2001, which I saw in your presentation. So thinking about it from the perspective of this foundation of who gets to learn and why, and how like we've slowly started to divide the types of ability to learn and what might be funded for the state and why. I was wondering if you could share perspective on the reason that we opened the door to like something like a charter school program to begin with.
I think it's also important to understand that IPS looked very different back in 2001.
Sure.
When we opened that door, you were still mostly in your traditional school setup across the district. You could get transportation to one particular elementary school, one particular middle school, and one particular high school based on where you lived. And the reality is that a lot of those schools were really struggling. And so families wanted options other than transportation to that neighborhood school, or even just wanted to be able to send their child somewhere else. And private school vouchers, I believe, were not yet a thing. I think that's after. And so charter schools were a way for families in the city to have options outside of the restricted structure of IPS.
Sure.
You go to this elementary school and then this middle school and this high school.
So why were we struggling? Why were we at a point of struggle to begin with? Like at that point?
We need to go. You can keep going on this one. We need to go back to desegregation and busing.
Okay, sure.
So I'll kind of tee you up, but like we obviously had the federal desegregation order through the U.S. Supreme Court Brown versus Board of Education. After that, IPS was in a weird space because the shape of our district is very strange. And in the late 60s and early 70s, we were exploring this idea of Unigov, where the city and the county of Indianapolis were going to get consolidated. And IPS was still basically de facto segregating its students and its schools based on how it was busing kids across certain boundaries. But in Unigov, there was an option on the table for IPS to actually unite with the county and there be one school district instead of what we currently have now. And that was taken off the table at the last minute because of pushback from the surrounding suburban school districts in like Pike Township, Warren Township, which at the time were predominantly white and IPS was predominantly not. And so because of that pushback, you have Unigov, you have a united city and county, except you also have this really weird smattering of 11 different school districts in the city. Well, there was a lawsuit. The courts saw that and they were like, this is like just straight up de jure legal segregation. You've basically written your segregation into law. And there was a court order to mandate busing from students from IPS who were kind of being blocked out of these other districts to the outlying townships. And in fact, you probably heard Samson point this out because this was news to me. In the original plan for busing, some of the outlying areas like Carmel were included, but they pushed back and basically got out of the busing plan. But the busing was only one way.
Yeah, so you also have to understand that this was at the height of the baby boomers coming through. So not knowing that Unigov was coming, not knowing that this big court decision that was going to bus students out was coming, IPS built its final high school in John Marshall in, I want to say 1968. And so, IPS was growing and expanding at a peak of 109,000 students in Indianapolis Public Schools in 1969. And then immediately you have the Unigov decision, which buses out, you have the Unigov decision, which buses, which doesn't include IPS in it. And then you have this decision that comes down that, as I said, like sends students out one way, but doesn't send white students from the suburbs back in. And so you have this infrastructure that was built up for 109,000 students that very quickly starts plummeting down and down and down and down. And so scrambling to adjust your resources and your infrastructure, it's just been almost playing catch up since then, would be kind of the best way I can describe it.
Sure.
I went to Pike Township schools growing up, K-12. And when I first started at my elementary school, I think it was like 80, 90% white, and then 15, 20% everyone else. And by the time I graduated, it was maybe 25% white because busing was still going on. Busing didn't stop until
2016.
Okay.
Yeah. This is not ancient
I graduated
history.
in 2008. And it was remarkable that, I was hearing people like, oh yeah, we're moving to Zionsville because property values are going down, which of course is just a proxy for people of color moving nearby.
Sure.
There was no valid, but the kids are then parroting this. They don't realize that they're parroting racism, which is unfortunate. And just like looking back on that time and realizing how rapidly the shift was happening in Pike Township, and that was also mirroring shifts in Lawrence Township, Warren Township. And this was all just a spillover effect of what was happening in Indianapolis Public Schools.
So thank you for sharing all this. And thank you for continuing to help me build the foundation, I think. Because I'm like, okay, I'm ready to go. And then I'm like, wait a minute. No, we got more stuff that we need to kind of get on the table. Which leads me to like this idea of messaging. So like all of this stuff and all of these decisions I feel like are happening really fast. And you just talked about your own experience seeing the makeup of your school change very quickly. I grew up in a rural town in Indiana where I went to the public schools. There was one school. We had a private, a Catholic school option for grade school, but everybody went to the public school. And that was just like, that's what it was. You just went to school. But it seems like in cities, like things are changing very rapidly. And I'm interested in if you have perspective on how we're talking about changes to education or how education is operating in those kind of like the 70s, 80s, 90s, as that shift starts to really take off, that is either confusing folks or, because it's confusing to me in the present, just trying to unravel the past. But at the moment, like I'm interested in like, what are politicians, what are advocates for the segregation of schools, like what are they saying that get people to either buy in or to fall in line with a program that they probably, again, are trying to just catch up to, let alone just understand at a present day level? Well,
I think that the main thing you will find is it's all centered around the idea of school choice. And school choice on its surface, again, sounds great. But there have to be limits and guidelines and guardrails that we increasingly are breaking apart. And so, again, when we go back to the beginning of charter schools in 2001, there were no choices for families who did not want their neighborhood school. That is far from the case in 25.
Right.
If you go onto the Enroll Indy portal right now and type in your address, and you can even click that you want transportation, you probably have 14 to 15 elementary schools to choose from with transportation. Right? It's overwhelming for families.
Yeah.
And that's just if you want transportation, right? If you unclick that transportation button, you probably have 50 plus options that your child can go free of charge. And so a lot of the changes that have come have been around this idea of school choice. And I feel like I'm going to circle around in different ways here, but it's interesting because you say growing up in a rural area, one of the allies that we sometimes have in this conversation are rural school districts because we can pour all this money into the idea of school choice here in the cities. But the reality is in most rural communities, there still isn't that choice.
Right.
And so, as we shift money into these systems that are split and fractured and funnel these public money in different directions, those rural communities also are losing out as part of this.
Well, and not to jump too far ahead in the conversation, but that's been one of with the funding proposal to share property taxes between district and charter schools. One of the things that's been getting pulled away is that the charter schools have been getting a state-funded charter school grant.
Sure. And
part of the reason that they're wanting to pull that back is because a lot of the other rural districts are like, why are our income taxes funding charter schools in your city? Mm-hmm. And so there is this push and pull because at the same time, a lot of the rural school, I was talking with a teacher from Martinsville who was talking about how since vouchers have become more of a thing, the sense of school identity has started to get a little bit more fragmented in their city. It used to be like, the alumni association, homecoming, like everyone was just like all in on the artisans. And then what's happened over time is that it's just become more fragmented. The identity of the town, which was already kind of weaker than it was before, was still centered around the school, but that's become less of an anchor for the town. And there's similar things playing out in a lot of other communities. And that's true here as well, where you have a lot of schools that have like open, close, but they had been open for 50, 60, 70 years. To actually build a community around a school takes such a long time.
Right.
And right now we have created a system where people are describing the opening and closing of charter schools as a feature and not a bug of the system. But if that's a feature, that's a quote, like a direct quote that's been repeated many, many times by advocates.
Yeah.
But if that's a feature, at what cost? Because we are not just giving up educational quality, we're giving up the anchoring role that schools play in communities by just resigning ourselves to this. I'll say one other thing and then I'll shut up. But on the demographic piece is so interesting because it is really hard to convince a parent to put their child through discomfort, even if they know the discomfort is good for them. And what most of the data shows is that people will tend to choose schools based on mirroring demography. It's subconscious some of the time, but people will tend to choose schools with students and families that look like them and that they feel like they can be neighbors with and friends with. And that's unfortunate, but that's just the tribalist mentality that happens when you open up choice. And that doesn't mean that we should not have choices, but what has happened is that very few white families are choosing charter schools in Indianapolis. Not zero, but proportionally to public schools, much fewer. And very few families of color are choosing private schools using vouchers. Not zero, but proportionally way less than public schools. And if that trend continues, and those are the two options, charter and private, because the public school sector collapses, I don't see how we wouldn't end up resegregating the schools.
Sure. I mean, even like you said, at the subconscious level, we're just going to naturally move there anyway, yet in the moment that we are in, it feels very deliberate. We're just going to do this anyway. I appreciate all the information about charters, and I kind of want to get into that a little bit and pull that apart because the model of charters. Okay, I feel like I've heard that quote, but to hear somebody say it it's a feature, not a bug, that just doesn't make any sense to me. Wildstyle Pichelle did a report recently on charter school, public education fight right now. And one of the stats that he shared that was mind-boggling to me was in Indianapolis, 1 in 3 charters close. And you're talking about how they close at a quick rate. You shared something about an experience that you saw with Arlington when they got taken over, how they saw an 80% drop in enrollment in 3 years.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to right now answer the question of I'm trying to justify, how is that a feature? How is that a positive for education? And there is there's no good answer, I don't think. It's all bad. Because with closure is not enrollment, but when you lose 80% of your enrollment, you almost have to close. Because there's nobody there at the school to teach. So how does that evolve from we have 11 schools that we're doing this with, and none of them are doing good. The data shows that they're not doing good. We're going to double down on this. How does that happen? I realize that it's money and lobbying involved, obviously, but the data does not support the model that we now have. You mentioned, all the schools. Okay, I don't have the number here, but one of the things I wrote all caps. Indianapolis has too many schools.
Yeah,
that's a problem, and a lot of them are now fall under the charter model or charter governance. I feel like.
So yeah, the stat was that peak of 1969 with 109,000 students actively as IPS students. We had 118 schools. Today in 2025, we have 105 schools, so only a handful fewer. And there are only 50,000 school-age children even living in the IPS boundaries, 42,000 of which choose public. So we're oversaturated. So, we've gone from, how many charter schools were in 2001? So it's 4 to, I believe are we close to 70?
I think
50.
It
Sorry, I don't have. It changes.
It changes every minute.
Which is part of the problem we talk about. Is that there is no cap and there's no limit. And so, whereas it's one of my biggest complaints is where IPS since 1970 has continued to try to right size and change. I mean, myself as an educator, I've been caught up in that numerous times as IPS tried to restructure and move pieces around to accommodate for the shrinking population. But at the same time, we're just unfettered charter sponsors. And so there's 4 new schools right now up to be approved by the Mayor's Charter Board. And which is, when we get into all the legislation, it's one of the big challenges with the legislation because there's just no check. There's no, how do you even begin to plan? We don't even know how many entities you're planning with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I've taught at a charter school, I've taught at an innovation school, and now I'm at a district school. And I think that there are great charter schools that exist in the city, and there are great district schools. There are terrible ones of both. There are charter schools and district schools that disproportionately discipline students according to their race and according to their special education background. There's all of that. And when you dig too far into the data, you realize the data is just a mess.
Sure.
You don't have good data. You can spin it almost any way you want. And so then what remains? And to me, the most important thing is stability. And that's what we lack right now. We have just constant fluctuations, a lack of information for parents to make sensible decisions about the education of their kids. When I talk to my friends who are they have 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, so what school, would you recommend? I'm well, the schools that are open today are different than the schools that were open 2 years ago.
Sure.
But I remember when I first started, people talked about charter schools as if it was a laboratory, as if it was we're going to try out a different way of doing instruction in this area, see if it works. And if it works, we'll replicate it in the district. It was basically like a test that was supposed to be temporary. And of course, it's not become that. They've had a staying power that has long since outlived that original experimental framing. And the weird thing is the district has basically tried to do what the charter schools wanted. They created this choice setup that's very unique for districts in the country, where basically you can choose within from among many different instructional models within your area, and you can get bused to any of those. So within a zone, you have options of 4 to 8 elementary schools. It's no longer just one.
That's just the IPS ones.
That's just the IPS, yeah. And so one would think we're at the point now where we wouldn't need charter schools to provide the choice because the district has figured out a way to do it.
Right.
Instead, what we have is too many schools that don't want to just stop existing.
Yeah.
And so in order to continue to exist, we are fighting over resources. And then at the same time, as Tina mentioned, there is no control on adding more to that system. There are authorizers in its far-flung areas as northern Indiana who can just be yeah, Indianapolis gets another charter school.
Yeah, didn't you say there's 11 entities or something that can approve, but they can approve anywhere?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they take a cut off the top. I mean, it's administrative fees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then they are happy to sign away. And that's one of the challenges too. We talk about the feature, not a bug, of the idea is that charter schools are meant to be more accountable to their authorizers. That's the additional level of accountability. But the reality is with so many authorizers, they also, actually closing one has become, for non-fiscal reasons, has become an actual challenge. We've literally watched schools shop authorizers like, mayor's charter office is not going to approve me anymore. Let's go to Ball State or let's go to Train, try to have somebody else. And then
what is this, insurance? We're just, hey, what are the options? Give me a
and now with vouchers, we even have one here in Indianapolis that after losing 2 different charters from their authorizers, decided to become a private voucher school. And so they are still open despite this theoretical additional accountability. So it's become a challenge. And one thing I've been trying to emphasize to folks is that I think, that you talked about where, what's the successes here. And I think for individual children, right, these schools are the right places. In every single school, in every single model, there are kids who are thriving and kids who are struggling. But what I try to emphasize is with this fractured model, there is not a single student in this city who is getting everything they deserve, right? So even the kid who's having the absolute best experience is missing out on something because of this fractured model.
I really appreciate that you brought that up. There are multiple ways I want to go into this, but I want to touch on that first. I heard you share that in the presentation, that there's not a single student in the city that's getting everything that they deserve. I was wondering, and I want to ask, to each of you, because of each of your individual experiences in this field, particularly with pre and early teenagers, when students, particularly folks at the margins of resource and access, are given less than what they deserve, especially from an education standpoint, how does that impact them?
Number one, if you're going to pick the number one resource that's limited in this city, when we have this many schools, it's teachers. And the reality is we have vacancies in almost every single building in this city, and you can guess where those are concentrated, right? And so I would say number one, it's them not even getting an education.
Sure.
I have one of the schools I was at was really struggling with staffing, coming off of that state takeover, and there was a year with, or at least one semester with not a single science teacher in an entire high school. Not that we didn't try. We were constantly interviewing, constantly recruiting, doing everything we could to provide some sort of science education. I basically was writing lesson plans left and right for classes that I didn't teach. But the reality is that when you don't have enough teachers in the city to fill all those vacancies and salaries that are willing to support those teachers, then we're always going to see the most marginalized kids get the short end of the stick there.
I think, adding on to that, I think there's specific subgroups of students within those schools, students who have special education needs, students with language learning needs, where the vacancies just get redoubled.
Sure.
And you have additional services that the kid needs that are either unable to be provided at the level that they need it, or the kid flies under the radar and it's not even noticed.
Yeah.
I also think that just the self-esteem of students who attend a school that they know isn't what other students are getting elsewhere. And I mean, this is across Indianapolis public schools, charter and district. Students are feeling this because they know that if they move to this other township, they'll have a more stable experience. I have had a couple of students who've had their school. I had one student who went through 4 different school closures, I believe, of charter, district charter. All 4 of them closed while she was a student. And that's not uncommon. And once it becomes normalized, you just get a sense of I don't know how much I really matter.
Sure.
And that's devastating.
Yeah.
It makes it even worse when you're seeing your families who are trying to make choices that are presented to them repeatedly have those rebuffed. And it's no surprise that if I'm a family or a kid at a school that the state or an authorizer wants to close because maybe the school isn't doing very well, I want to defend that because it's at least it's a home, regardless of the academic performance. I mean, and that's part of the reason that stability, I think sometimes stability matters more than results because stability can breed results. If you have enough people in a place for long enough, they can learn to do the thing.
Right.
But if we're constantly opening and closing because a model doesn't work, even though most of these schools don't really have models anyways, if you're constantly doing that, nobody can even get a foothold and everyone just feels betrayed over and over again. And that is a very toxic feeling. And I've noticed this year quite the opposite at my district school when all of a sudden, with all of the rebuilding stronger resources, kids are just like realizing they have opportunities that they didn't expect to have. And I don't just mean music at school. I don't just mean extracurriculars, but just like there's a place that people are going to bring field trips and bring speakers. And they're like, oh, you're a building and you're here and you're going to be here. So I'm going to invest in a partnership with you because I trust that you won't close in 2 years.
Yeah.
And I found that so much harder at my charter school. I was able to be an anchor for a lot of nonprofits to come through and do things. And now that I'm gone, people are still reaching out. I'm like, who do I talk to here? I'm like, I don't know anyone that works there anymore. And it's only been a few years. And it's not like it's inevitable, but certainly it is easier to open and close in the charter space than it is in the district space, just because of the way that funding works and the way that the statutory obligations are. And I think the more that the district is pushed to be more like the charter system, the less stable it will get.
Well, without true oversight, you can just wash your hands and leave and whenever you want. I mean, I'm sure there's some sort of repercussion, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really seem like it affects you that much. You could probably leave a charter and go start another one in another place without much issue. What keeps you in the classroom and in the system? Like, why stay?
I'm still having a blast. I know I say that this is year 20 for me, actually. I am retiring at exactly 55 because I want to go out while I still have energy.
100%.
So I have 13 years and one quarter left. But I say that to say, but I feel like I have the same energy to tackle that next 13 and a quarter years. But that's in part just because I thrive on the kids and the classroom. And I tried for a couple of years when my son was young, leaving the classroom to do more administrative work and realized that it just doesn't bring me the same energy. And, you know, I think part of where Ronak and I really are similar is that we really just thrive on those relationships with the kids and the time in the classroom. Like that, my day goes so fast because the time with kids is just like that. I'm having a good time. That, and I would say, like, as far as me being an IPS, part of it is because I've been in IPS that entire time, even though I've been displaced multiple times. And it's honestly because one, having the stability of a school district, I have never had to reapply for a job. I've only had to find a new location through all of these changes. And so knowing that my salary would be stable, that my benefits would be stable, there's a huge value to that in the system piece. And honestly, I just had fallen in love with the kids of this district and serving the kids of IPS. And I just haven't wanted to leave that. So I don't know. I say that when I had no idea what I was getting into when I was fresh out of college, taking a job at where Ronak works now at TC Howe Community High School at the time, actually TC Howe Academy at the time. And yet I realized that this was a part of the community that I just loved and wanted to do everything I could to help.
I would echo that. It's just so much fun. It's so much fun. I mean, I look forward to going to work. I have fun every single day. It's between the goofing and the teaching. Like goofing is so much fun in middle school. Like
you like to goof.
Yeah, I love to goof. I just like the kids. I feel like they have a great sense of humor in middle school. They have so much energy. They're still extremely curious, but they're able to like channel it in ways that are like extremely creative. And like I like science. I mean, just like doing labs all the time, being hands-on all the time. It's like working in a museum, except that like you have a relationship with the kids day after day instead of like interacting with new people all the time. And like, yeah, it's hard. Yeah, it's tiring. But like, it's 2025. What isn't hard and tiring?
That's true.
Everything is
That's
difficult. Oh my gosh. Everything is so hard to do. And things just keep getting harder to do. And even though, yes, like Tina and I spend a ton of time in addition to all of our school stuff, doing advocacy stuff.
Oh yeah, I didn't even mention that. You guys are doing the advocacy.
Which also takes a lot of time. It's easier to do it in service of like the thing that we care about the most.
Exactly.
I think sometimes it can be really demoralizing to feel like you also have to fight every single other battle that's out there that's like devastating to people. But like at least this one, it's like, I know what the impact is of what I'm advocating for. And I know that I'm advocating for the right thing because I understand it well.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it because like if one other teacher can tap into like the reasons why that you're there and can tap into that for themselves, I hope that they continue to stay in the fight because like you said, you know, we don't have enough of teachers already. We got way too many schools, not enough good people to fill those schools to give a proper, appropriate education that these kids deserve, the students deserve.
I just want to be clear that like that feeling has changed and channeled over the years, right? As
100%.
I said, I stepped out of the classroom when I did for a reason, especially when you're a new parent. It's a lot, but that time out really did give me that perspective of what I value and what I like most. So
for sure.
I just say, I don't want people to feel guilty if they're not feeling like that at any given point.
Not at all. Not at all. I think you have to explore the different facets of the systems. I think it gives you, again, more context for the reason why you do this particular job. You become a teacher, I think, first because of that wanting to build with students, I think. And
can I add one more thing?
Absolutely.
I will say, I know a lot of people right now are losing their jobs at government levels and trying to figure out what their next step is. Like, it's worth trying being a teacher. If you haven't tried it, I think there's a lot of teachers that are burnt out and like should take some time and step away for themselves. But there's also a lot of people that have never even thought about it as something that would work for them. And I think a lot more people would love it than they realize.
We should set up a little forum. Interested in teaching? Let's talk about it. I want to go not back, but I want to connect to something you talked about a little bit before we got into this particular piece of it. You brought up vouchers. So we've touched on, a little bit of IPS foundation and like why we teach, the introduction of charters and kind of like this division between, or the splitting between the creation of school choice, maybe the illusion of school choice. But while I was listening to your presentation, I was thinking about like why charters now exist and like what the purpose is, like thinking about like segregation, thinking about all these other things that lay at the center of this. And it made me think about like how people have now taken advantage of the voucher program when originally it was for low-income families to be able to access something that was inaccessible to them. Now it is for essentially anybody of any income to utilize, and the data shows that it's the people with the highest income levels that are getting the most benefit out of this program. When I see that and when I hear folks who are in it talk about that, it makes me visualize a road, and at the end of the road is privatization, and education now falls under that umbrella. Why, from your perspectives, are we pushing so hard to now privatize education?
You want to start? You can go ahead.
It's
a big question.
The private school space right now is super interesting because you kind of can break it into like a few different buckets.
Okay.
So you have your like primarily religious private schools. Many of them have been around for a long time, and their main goal is we want access to religious instruction that we can't give in a public school. So that's one. Then you have your kind of exclusive private schools. So we're going to charge a premium tuition, much higher than the religious private schools typically. And so a lot of them don't even accept vouchers. So like Park Tutors, Sycamore School, Orchard School, they don't accept vouchers. And a lot of them are like cream skimming. So they want to get like the highest ability students and put them all in one place. Then you have this like new kids on the block they've just opened in the past year or two, and they are charging tuition that is exactly the amount of the voucher and no additional fees. So like typically, like almost all of the private schools that have been around for a while, if they charge tuition and they have fees and things like that, the amount is still more than
You're still paying
something. There's a couple of exceptions, but for the most part, most of them are a higher amount than that amount. But for a lot of these new ones, that's not the case. The voucher covers everything. So they are designed for the voucher system. And then this fourth weird bucket that I have still to dig into are the online ones. So you have some schools that are actually based elsewhere. And they accept Indiana vouchers to pay for online education. I don't think those will be around very long personally, but that's kind of where we are. And like the one thing that all of these groups have in common is that if you're a private school, you are not required to serve students with disabilities. That all has to go through the public school district. You have to do some stuff for students experiencing like who are unhoused, but it's really unclear what's really required. And so that typically also goes to the public school district. It hasn't really been tested by court cases yet because a lot of times nobody's going to sue their private school. They're just going to leave and go somewhere else in most cases. Why people want this? It's really hard to say at the systemic level versus the individual level, but the trend, the movement is happening towards segregation. And so it's hard, like you look at the way that things are moving and then you hear what people are saying and the two don't really match. It's not as if unequivocally the private schools are doing better. There's a lot of them
Right.
that are actually doing worse now that they have to take state tests. We can see the data. Some are doing better, but the ones that are doing better are typically the ones with exclusively high tuition, where you would, if you could afford that tuition, you can afford a tutor.
Sure.
And the ones that are not often actually have pretty diverse groups of people that are part of a congregation. They're going to the school and their data is pretty much on par with the neighborhood school.
Sure.
So.
Yeah. I mean, yes. And again, the reality is just this idea of school choice is
Right.
just, it's when you open that gate, right? How far does it swing open and how far do we push the public funds to provide that school choice? And that's one of our big fears with Senate Bill 518, which would divide the property taxes between both IPS and the charters. But what's to say the next session? It's not saying,
Right.
if we're all on this idea of these tax dollars should follow the students to places with unelected boards, next year is it also sharing with the private schools in the district, right? Or if not that, 10 years from now. So it's all a slippery slope of where does the public money go, and the reality is there's also just a lot of people making a lot of money off of this system, and private vouchers being one of them. As I want to talk about like kind of that third bucket you talked about of these new schools that are popping up. Some of them charge a little bit more, but it's fascinating to see some of the private voucher schools that are popping up. I mentioned one in my talk that I just learned about just researching for the talk, which is one based out of Noblesville, which is, a travel soccer team.
Oh yeah.
That opened up, and basically their tuition is the cost of the voucher plus what the travel soccer fees used to be.
Right.
And so now the kids can come and train during the day. I mean, even my church, which I love, they had talked about, they had explored the idea of should we open, they have a choir program that's fantastic. And they said, should we start, this full day choir school option? And I immediately said, absolutely not.
He's sprinting to the lectern at the front.
No. And they were like, Andrea Hunley said the same thing. So I said, good, I told you.
Yeah, let me affirm that.
And I love you. And I trust them to do all the right things. But the reality is, again, like it's just we're oversaturated. We don't, and I don't want them to participate in a system that should not exist morally.
Well, and there's no this goes back to your first question, which is what are schools for? Right now, there's some regulations on private schools accepting vouchers. The main thing is just that they have to take the state test. And that's not true in all states, so that's something. But for me, I don't really personally care one way or the other about the religious education piece.
Sure.
If you want it, fine, it's a choice. I care about the exclusionary practices, and I care about, are you going to kind of funnel kids towards just one thing instead of exposing them to a broad education or a liberal education, although I know it's a dirty word now, but that's what we used to call it, as a liberal education.
I think if you just enjoy people having human rights, you're liberal now.
That would be, yes. But one of the weird things is that now with all of the child labor stuff you were talking about, where there's so many more abilities for kids to just get into the workforce really early with no regulations, what stops any company in Indiana from just opening a charter school at their plant or their factory? Like right now, I don't think there's anything stopping it. And then is that what school is? Is it just not even a trade school, not even an apprenticeship, because you're not making money. You're actually just giving them state money for your free labor as a child. I don't know where that slippery slope falls. But if I were to ask people to do one thing, it would be to demand that if there's vouchers, there needs to be some sort of safeguards against those, not just the extreme cases, but just in general, everyone who wants to be able to go to your school should be able to go to it same as a public school if you're going to take public money.
Yeah. I think especially with 518 and the language that I hear a lot when people talk about it is we have to share half of our tax revenue. When you look at the actual language of the bill, it's 57%. It's more, at least from what I've read, it's more than half, which to me, it's already encroaching on this. Well, what's to say we stop at 50? Why not go to 75? We're already over. And you guys are already, by the statistics, losing students. You don't have the enrollment numbers or whatever for people in your district. People are already leaving anyways. So why wouldn't we just take this and give it to the schools that are already doing that? But then you look at the data and 1 out of 3 of those schools is going to be closed in the next 2 years. And so what happens to that money then? What happens to those people? And what happens to those students? And again, I'm just, the path that I see is to Subaru opening their own charter school right outside of West Lafayette
Yeah.
to send kids to go work at the factory.
Maybe that's the reason for the change in the zoning law bill.
Oh, well, we know that reason.
No.
There's
Just
the
kidding.
one other piece of it. You asked the question about why now, and I do think on the religious piece, and I'm seeing this even with like the Hindu temple, but like congregation attendance has been declining.
Sure.
Across like in almost every group, congregation attendance is on the decline. Lots of churches have been closing, and far fewer new churches are opening, except in like far-flung areas. And I've heard some people say that like this is a way to rescue like religious organizations that have been struggling to stay afloat in the changing headwinds. Like this is a financial like safeguard, and also a way to bring in a younger community that may have felt separated by having them kind of attend church during the day more so. And I can understand that mindset. At least I can see the merit in it if that's your perspective. I don't know if it's actually going to work out the way that people want it to.
Sure.
It doesn't seem like it is.
Well, that just made me think about, like, we talk a lot about small business entrepreneurship on the show, and like Indiana likes to be the hub of the small business. And then another conversation is, how do we retain young talent? Well, now that we're having this conversation, I'm like, well, the way you retain young talent is you don't let them leave, because the only choice that you have is to go to school and learn how to make parts for Subaru. And so you go to the school, and then you got your education. I got my degree in fenders, and now I'm here. So our industry can do really well. Our manufacturers can make a lot of money on their top line. But like you said, like you've been saying the whole time, like, what does that really say, not just for our education systems, but like how we treat our kids, and like what we think about the next generation of people?
There are some places that are unaffected by this. There are some school districts where you still just have one high school with 6,000, 7,000 students, and there aren't really competing charter schools, but those are in wealthy areas. And those places are the places that can retain teachers. So you wonder who's going to run these companies and where are they being educated? They're being educated in wealthy white places. And everyone else is like, hey, pick one of these schools, go to that, and then work over here. It's just, right now, it just feels like things are worsening in that direction. Yeah. And the only thing that would make it better is stability. And that's exactly the opposite of the way policy is moving.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, who is being taught, and what are they being taught, and why and how? What is you mentioned it a couple times, stability. Like, I think we've laid the foundation for the framework of what stability is. What does stable look like, and how do we get there? Obviously, we beat back this legislation, we come up with a policy that actually works, but like, what does that, like, from a practical standpoint from here going forward look like? How do we get to stable?
I should still be in my classroom when my kids graduate. Like, I shouldn't, the school I started at closed 5 or 6 years after it opened, and I was teaching 7th grade. So by the time like my kids graduated, the school was gone. They couldn't visit me. You know what I mean? And I'd left before that. I had many reasons for leaving that you can ask me about later. But it was gone. Yeah. And that is the experience of so many schools and students, where it's like, I don't really have a place to come back to. Yeah.
Same. As I said, this is year 20 for me, but it's also my 5th school. Yeah. My first one was where Ronak is now, but that has gone through multiple hands since then. It's closed. It's been taken over by the state. It's been closed. It's never with any improvement. And all that. And that was a place, with this rich history. I'm so glad to see it reopened. But again, there's no reason that it was ever not. Like, I should still be there working in my neighborhood. Yeah. But then, IPS, some of it is things we've also done to ourselves. I mean, all my other moves have been because of internal restructurings. Again, some of it attempting to right size. Sure. But my second school, I was kicked out along with all the other staff to bring in a new school model that was really meant to appeal to the Meridian Kessler families, because, IPS for a long time was trying to stem the tide by appealing to wider, wealthier families along that corridor. We can see that with the placement of the Center for Inquiry programs along that. So, IPS doesn't get off the hook in a lot of these decisions. I want to be clear on that. But again, all of that was attempts to that's what happens when you're forcing folks to compete.
Right.
Right. And
You make decisions
you
against
make
your
decisions
own best interest.
that might be against the best interest of all of your children. And I think that's kind of what I was getting to earlier is like, are we looking at what's best for the individual? Are we looking at what's best for the whole?
And
right?
I don't want stability to be understood as complacency.
For sure.
Yeah.
Stability, because to be fair, to be totally clear, we had a stable system of segregation at one point that was horrible.
Yeah.
We had a stable system of like de facto and de jure. And then after that, we had a stable system of terrible schools. So it's not as if like we can just sit on our laurels. And so I think another ingredient for that is to take some of the learnings that we've had during this period of turmoil to be like, at a minimum, we need to make sure that we have accountability in these particular ways for the school. Like the school has to be doing these things, and we need to have eyes on it to see what to ensure them that they're actually doing it. We need to be able to hold their feet to the fire. I do think that schools were getting away with a lot before No Child Left Behind, and I think that I have a lot of problems with No Child Left Behind. But the one thing that I think is good that's come out of it is that people are noticing what's happening in schools more than they did.
Sure.
And that can't stop. But now that we know how to do it, even if our tools for tracking it are far from perfect, I have a lot more certainty that that like stability will be stability that is vigilant.
Yeah. It takes a constant vigilance, and that's the hard part is like no one person or one entity can always be like that. It's just like when the problems arise, are we going to do the bare minimum of application of history of our lessons and do better or try and do better? Or are we going to be complacent and say, well, fuck it. Like we're just going to let it go and whatever happens, happens. You said in your talk that not a single solution, there's no single solution that solves all of the myriad of problems that we're currently facing. And that in order to reach solutions, we have to navigate as community. It's the year of community here on the show. And we talk a lot about how nobody does their work alone. So with that in mind, we have a recurring segment on the show called Give Them Their Flowers, and where we ask our guests to shout out persons or individuals or entities that they feel like deserve their flowers. Right now, shout out to Madeline McKinnon, Frida's Flowers, for sponsoring this segment. I wanted to ask you both, since you're here together, if Tina, you could give Ronak his flowers and Ronak vice versa.
Yeah.
Yes, that's perfect.
That I have been so grateful for Ronak this year. So without getting into the whole story, we actually have not been like super close until the last year and a half or so getting into political work. But I've known him for a long time and his reputation. And it's been so great having his energy to balance. Again, we have very different experiences through our careers. Him being mostly charter, me being a like lifelong IPS union bargainer and all that. But at the same time, like the more we've gotten to know each other, the more it's like, oh, we actually have had very similar experiences. And so that's been really powerful to kind of join forces and try to help navigate what does this look like as we go forward.
Yeah, Tina just has such a wealth of knowledge and history, and also is a planner, and I'm not really a planner. And has, I don't know, like her instruction is like the kind of thing that I like. I'm like, I could never do what you do. What you do is incredible. And I've actually been able to see videos of you teach. So I know that I'm speaking from fact and not just from your reputation.
Hacking my YouTube.
And so it's been great. Yeah, like she said, we haven't really known each other well that long, but I feel like coming from such different places and realizing the commonality of our experiences, that's a trend across the sector, because in all of these schools that are being pitted against each other, there are lots of amazing teachers. Yeah. And teachers get along with teachers. Like it doesn't really matter what kind. A lot of them don't even know what kind of school they're working in. Just like a lot of parents and students don't know that if they're in a district school or a charter school, you're just attending the school that's there, or working on the school that's nearby, or the one that like reached out, or the one that felt right. And if you feel like you can do the work wherever you are, then I support it. Yeah. And so I think I just gravitate towards teachers a lot. Maybe it's because I can't stop talking about this stuff, and nobody else wants to listen to me. But it's been great. So thank you for accepting the flowers.
Thank you.
100%. Thank you for giving each other your flowers. You both deserve them. Anybody else that you feel like right now you just needs to be shouted out? We need to know who's doing good work out there.
Everyone.
It's really everyone. I think especially right now, this is groups of people, but not individuals. I'm so sorry. But anyone who is teaching students who are undocumented.
Oh, for sure.
Yes, absolutely.
There's just so much weird stuff going on and so little that can be talked about. And it's It's incredibly hard. I've heard so many stories recently of students and families who were impacted by like shock arrest, shock deportations happening here. They're losing family members here and there. And I just think a lot of the people who are writing these policies, they are so separate from the human impact of what they're doing that they don't feel like, they don't even know where the empathy lives. They don't know where it is. Because they don't know anyone who is experiencing the impact of their decisions. And so I'm sure they think they're the heroes of their story, but obviously they're the villains of mine.
I got a bill passed.
Yeah.
Well, you don't even live here, bro. Go back to Northwest Indiana.
No, and I want to echo that. It's, I got up at the school board meeting in February and gave a shout out to the school board, which I'm not always there to tell them positive things about themselves. Sure. But I was, because at the end of the January meeting, mostly unnoticed because it had so much vitriol around Senate Bill 518, that the school board of IPS passed a resolution to support undocumented students and families. And I think it went mostly unnoticed, but at a time when Todd Rokita has very specifically called out IPS and targeted IPS, that was a very brave move.
Yeah.
And I think, so I give them a shout out for taking that stand at a time when they have a lot to lose at the state level, and yet we're still willing to make that statement. That I think that takes a lot of courage from both the administration and the board, and so really want to shout that out, and that they didn't let all the other state level worries like make that decision for them.
Yeah.
So, but that's part of why I take pride in being a part of IPS. And I think that there's value in the strength of a large school district in things like that. Yeah. Whereas you have a little bit more leeway to throw your weight around on those kind of social issues. For sure.
Shout out to the school board. I appreciate y'all coming here and sharing so much. You said, I've referenced the talk. I'm going to link the talk. We're going to cut clips into the talk. But you said like, you could barely scratch the surface of all this in 2 hours.
Oh my gosh.
Let alone 1 hour that we've just been sitting here talking about it. Let alone the 30 minutes that you had in the talk to actually get into it. And I hope that we've been able to build out a little bit more context here. I know that I've learned a lot even, and I feel like I'm excited to share the whole episode, but especially some clips, because I know that people are going to be like, oh, I did not know that. And it's going to be important information, especially going forward. Out of respect for your spring break, I have two more things. One's a question that's last, and the next is a quote, because I feel like it's a powerful quote. I also feel like I want to respect your time, and y'all need time to rest. So I've talked a lot, and I'm going to quit talking now, but I am going to talk a little bit more because I want to share this quote, which you shared, to close out your talk, from Superintendent Alicia Johnson. It was so powerful. I was like, I feel like people just need to hear these words. And just, yeah. So she said, we should be approaching this problem from a perspective of abundance. The money exists in the city and state to fully fund public education. We just continue to make choices that create a false environment of scarcity. Further dividing the resources in a hostile legislation only exacerbates this issue and drives a wedge in our community. Voters have repeatedly chosen to support IPS through ballot referenda. Tens of thousands of families continue to choose IPS every single day, especially those students with the highest needs. And the energy around finding a solution to our city's public education challenges has reached an all-time high. But that solution will need to come from collaboration and community action, not chaos and coercion. What's one last piece of parting information that you would want people to walk away with in addition to or building off of kind of these ideas that Superintendent Johnson shared?
Okay. So number one, I feel like thinking about staying engaged and doing your best to follow kind of what's going on. But at the same time, it's really important for folks to like really carefully listen to who they're like, where is this messaging come from? Because the reality is there's so much disinformation. And I will say, like, the reality is there's a little bit of misinformation kind of on all sides.
Sure.
Some of it is much more intentionally manipulative than others. But the reality is like, pay attention to sources, kind of try to take a balance of what everything has said and move forward. And again, the reality is there's a lot of manipulated numbers out there, and it just makes it really hard for anyone to know what's really going on. So find those few sources that you trust and kind of try to tap in and follow along so that you know what to do next, because we just need we need folks on board and engaged, and we need folks across the city, whether you have kids or not, to like care about the future of what happens here.
Specific sources that folks like you would recommend paying attention to for numbers and stuff.
So Chalkbeat Indiana is a pretty good middle of the line source. I mean, again, some of what they quote is going to be from organizations that very specifically listen to what they say specifically about the numbers that they use. But the reality is that like it's probably going to be the most unbiased source that you would find across the board.
Cool.
I'll also double dip and do two things. One is just like, keep in mind the question that you asked us at the beginning, like, what do you think school is for? Because I do think sometimes with all of the different policy changes that happens, people lose track of the core of the issue and they don't really know what to advocate for or against. And I do think sometimes people end up, I've had conversations where like people are like, am I on the wrong side of this issue? And I myself have asked myself that question many times where I'm just like, oh, what? I thought this, but then now I think this. And education is just, it's messy and it's not as easy to decide what is the right way to go about doing things. And there are times where we do need to challenge our assumptions about what's right or wrong and not be attached to something. The second thing, again, not being attached, and I mentioned this at the talk as well, is that everyone needs to know what IPS's map looks like. And I will say this as often as I can, but it's the same map that it was when it was charged as being a segregation-based map. And it's a weird one. I mean, we have like islands of IPS inside and totally enclosed by other districts because of the way schools are located. And we're just never going to have an equitable school system as long as it's shaped like that. Changing that is going to be painful and hard, but I think it's necessary. And I think especially right now where the State House is talking about doing, this district-wide busing system and really not interrogating the policies that have made this system the way that it is. We need to be looking at things county-wide because we created this mess by not thinking of things on the big picture. But yeah, it's just, I think that's something that everyone should know, that we're not talking about borders that were made equitably. Yeah.
Well, we're going to link to Chalkbeat. We're going to link to that map because I need to know more about the map. And we're going to keep educating. Like, thank you so much for coming here and sharing. I hope that you were able to get out stuff that we were able to talk about. I don't know. I was just like, as you were sharing, I was like, I feel like I was so prepared for this conversation. I feel so unprepared because to your point, like I feel pretty confident that I read a lot and a lot of different sources. And even then it's kind of similar to the amount of choices that you have for schools. Like there's so many different people saying so many different things. So for me, it's just to be able to sit down with people who are literally in it to just learn from. It means a lot to me. It's a big privilege. So thank you for coming by and thank you for sharing. And last but not least, for each of you, for folks out there watching, listening right now who want to find you, want to follow you, want to support you, if you're open to that, how do they go about doing that?
I think you can probably Google me and find a lot of ways to get in touch with me. I'm not sure exactly, but yeah, email is probably the best. Okay. I can share that.
All right. If you don't mind sharing it, I'll link it down there.
Yeah. Probably same. I mean, I have Instagram at Tina C. Ahlgren, but that's mostly pictures of my child. But I mean, it would be a place to connect if that's something you're interested in. And my email address is just first name, last name @gmail.com. So Tina Ahlgren, also a great place.
I love it. I know you're advocates, but you're also teachers, and I love the accessibility. I think that must just be a teacher thing. Just like, hey, reach me whenever you need me. So, Tina, Ronak, thank you so much. Hopefully we can have you back in the future to talk about more, better, stable things in education. But if we keep fighting, we're going to keep having this conversation. So we'd love to have you back in the future. For everybody else, new episodes of the show every Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. ConversationPiecePod.com for everything Conversation Piece related, including the open door. Click the open door to learn more if you're interested in participating. We do have merch as well at Conversation Piece Pod on all the social media apps that we are on. And I think that's it. We have an incredible run of conversations coming up here in April, kicked off by Ronak and Tina. So be sure to stay tuned in. Make sure that you subscribe and like and do all of those things that are called engagement because that helps grow the show. With all that said, This is John Overton and Popular Rapture on the mics, Mike Lee and Mike Lee production on the cameras. Shout out to the Studs and shout out to Pattern Indy for this space. Shout out to Madeline McKinnon and Freeze Flowers for the flowers. Shout out to Tina and Ronak for being incredible guests. And last but not least, shout out to myself for hosting the show. I've been Patrick Armstrong, and this has been Conversation Piece. See y'all soon.
We're good? You all ready? You good?